give us a little context about the Jersey City you know, that you love, you've seen, and now the Jersey City that you lead.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you, and thank you for all of you for coming this morning. It's nice to see such a great turnout, and thank you to Stephen as well. So let me give a little perspective on kind of where we were prior to 2013 and kind of where I think that we've been able to have an impact in the last 5 years. So, my family has ties to Newark as well. They actually moved to Newark after the riots as an immigrant family, and it was the only real estate they could afford. So they've been in Newark in their business front now for 40 some odd years, so they've seen the evolution of that city. And Jersey City's story is very similar in the sense that we had a flight outside of the city, and then over the last 15, 20 years, you've seen kind of a gradual return back to Jersey City. The initial return to Jersey City was more of a function, I think, of cheap real estate and proximity to New York. And in many ways, it was happening despite policies in the city. There was no real kind of strategic goal on how to attract people here, who we wanted to attract, what type of city we wanted to be. It was just happening because of the growth and the changes in New York, particularly in Manhattan. Over the last 5 years, we've kind of set a real clear strategy on how we want to incentivize development away from the waterfront, how we want to change the housing stock that we have in order to incentivize younger demographics that can really be attractive to the business community, and how we wanted to look at the city as more of a sense of place as opposed to being a bedroom community. So we've really targeted some initiatives around that, and I think largely we've been successful, not without our mistakes along the way, but I think by and large it's worked out okay. And I think we're still in the third or fourth inning of this kind of comeback story here.
As someone who grew up in New Jersey, and dad worked in a factory in the Ironbound district and knows the economy of New Jersey, went to Rutgers, I hate to bore you with academic stuff, there's a paper written when I was a very young boy, and it contrasted two cities I know, the New York metropolitan area, including Newark and Jersey City, with Pittsburgh, a place I lived for 20 years. And in this essay, the guy who wrote it, a famous urban economist, said, Pittsburgh had a different kind of economy. It was dominated by a few big companies. And that was going to be a struggle to turn it around. But this area of the New York metropolitan area, Jersey City, Newark, and I think Jersey City and Newark even more so because they were so much more manufacturing, had many, many small factories. There was Colgate's, and yeah, my uncle worked there. There was Maxwell House down the road. But there weren't the big behemoth companies. It was always an economy that was built on smaller scale manufacturing and smaller scale business. Is that true? And if so, does that sense of smallness, and he was arguing that nimbleness, that ability to create new things, mobilize resources, would always put this place ability to make, does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I think to some degree. My grandfather actually worked on West Side Avenue on a garbage bag manufacturing company, so very similar narrative on that front. I think over the last couple of years, we've made an emphasis on attracting smaller companies here, because I think that's first and foremost where you see the most job growth, and I think that's kind of the long-term plan for growth of a healthy city, is that you want to attract those smaller, nimble, more companies. So I think it's in our DNA historically, to be kind of a little bit nimble, and I think we still kind of lean in that direction.
Some people look at Jersey City because sometimes they call me the architect of gentrification. I made every place gentrify. And they look at this and they go, well, Jersey City, not really much going on here. It's a bedroom community for the yuppies and the hipsters and the creative class. I took a little walk around this morning. Yeah. I didn't see that. I saw a much more diverse community, an extraordinarily diverse. But anyway, to what degree has the revitalization been powered by the in-migration of highly educated, relatively affluent people who were coming here seeking out lower cost than Manhattan? Yeah. And to what degree is it powered by other things?
Yes, so I don't have if you came here initially 5 years ago because you were looking for a cheaper alternative, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It's how that story evolves over time, whether you choose to stay here and view Jersey City as a sense of place, is what's important. So we've tried to kind of invest throughout the city in some really big, infrastructure projects, I would say, or story projects that would give Jersey City more of a sense of place, whether it's more of a cultural arts institution, the museum in Journal Square, SciTech City in Ward F on the south side of the city, a new city hall municipal complex on the south side of the city, or repurposing the waterfront down here to make it more attractive to businesses or startups. You know, what we're trying to do is create a little bit more of a sense of place that people want to stay here and work here. So if somebody came here initially 5 years ago and they said, hey, this is just a bedroom community for me, I don't fault them for that. I don't have a problem with that. It's really how that story evolves and how they see their long-term stay here in Jersey City, what's important. I think we're shaping that in a better direction today.
Yeah, one of the big things that comes out in that terrific report Stephen and our colleagues did is 50,000 creative, knowledge, professional workers. That's a big number for a city of this scale. And the other one that really strikes me, and I mean it's bolded and highlighted in my notes, but for all of you, if you take the whole New York metro area, that's not just the 5 boroughs, that includes the areas around Rutgers, around other great universities, Columbia, you can go down to Princeton. You take the entire metro, the place with the highest concentration of tech workers is Jersey City.
Yeah.
Why? That's an amazing, and that's something most people wouldn't know. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think initially the city targeted back office data type jobs on the waterfront. And I think that you saw a lot of immigrants from East Asia coming here targeting those types of jobs. And eventually you reached a critical mass here where it became attractive because of proximity with people with similar backgrounds, but it wasn't only that type of job. And simultaneously to that, you saw the city changing from just that back office type of job in financial services to attracting different type of industries here and not only back office jobs. So those changes kind of happened organically. And I think that that's kind of led to this where you've reached the kind of a tipping point and it's kind of taken a life of its own.
In a way, you kind of have, and I want to ask how much of this was intentional, how much was organic, how much just evolved. You kind of have a very interesting development model here in Jersey City. Because as we just said in the report documents, you have this very big creative class, this very big cadre of tech workers. But also, you have one of the highest concentration of blue collar still. One of the things that struck me when I was mapping this across the entire country, this area from kind of the Port of Newark through Elizabeth, Bayonne, over to Jersey City, has one of the highest concentrations, and the airport area too, yeah, of high-paying blue-collar jobs that have disappeared. Has it been intentional? Have you tried to build a kind of mixed or integrated economy where blue-collar and white-collar, working class and creative class can mix and mingle, or is that something that's just evolved on its own?
I'd be lying if I said it was entirely intentional. I think that we've just tried to make a community that attracts all different types of people and investments in all different communities where you have mixed income and mixed backgrounds, and I think that's led to some good outcomes. So I think some of that stuff was really accidental, but we're thankful the way it's worked.
Now, one of the things that I see, I'm going to Detroit Sunday to be part of the City Lab conference. My wife's from Detroit. And you see it there. You certainly see it in San Francisco. You see it in Seattle, a kind of backlash. People saying, yeah, well, and obviously Seattle and San Francisco are at another level. The creative people, the tech workers, the tech companies are doing well. Housing prices are going up on being left behind. But even in Detroit, you see there with a racial overlay. Dan Gilbert, someone who I admire, who helped renovate that downtown. People saying, look, it's for more affluent people. It's not for me. It's not my city. You raised the minimum wage here.
Yeah.
$15 an hour, a living wage. What have you done? What should we be doing? What can we learn from Jersey City to build a kind of community that has a tech base, that has a creative base, but in which every person feels like they can fit in as part of the community?
So I was in San Francisco last week for the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders Summit, and I haven't been to San Francisco for a little while, and my takeaway is that it's scary what's happening there with regards to the homeless issues and the poverty levels in that city. It's disturbing to think that you have such wealth in a city and then you could walk literally every 10 feet and see a homeless person on the street with severe mental illness. It's a good case study of what not to do here. I think that you get into kind of on the local municipal level sometimes this dangerous spiral of listening to a very vocal minority that has a set interest that necessarily isn't in line with the majority of people that don't have time to go to stuff. So those people would be always against new growth, more units, larger construction, thinking of ways to work with the homeless population in proper way to give them a course in getting their feet underneath them. You have a vocal minority in a lot of cities that push up against that and then leads to outcomes that create these disparities and difficult places to live. What we've tried to do over the last 4 years, and people appreciate it, is to think about ways to actually push forward on what we believe is ultimately a sustainable long-term city. If you think about growth, and just say real quick in different communities away from the waterfront, you'll have kind of the communities that are upset that you won't see investment or dollars coming into their neighborhood. And then at the same time, when you do see investments, are the same people that are upset that you see change in the neighborhood. And those two things always work simultaneously. If you have billions of dollars coming into a neighborhood, you are ultimately going to see change. So we try to think of ways to grow smartly, to incorporate affordable housing. We've made smaller units to actually try and make them a little bit more affordable to younger people. We've been aggressive on ideas like we are in Bayfront, where we're spending $170 million to kind of rework 4,000 units, which we think will be kind of a good model for the entire region. So, I try my best not to listen to that vocal minority and try to think about, the majority of people and what would they want, and hopefully come election time they appreciate it. It's worked out so far okay for me. So,
we're lucky. We're lucky we're in the New York Metro, if you think about it. San Francisco, I say this, San Francisco is either going to become New York or it's going to become Pittsburgh. It has reached a point of, 5.5 million people, where it's either got to scale to be a real city. And the U.S. has seen so many of those. It's seen it with Pittsburgh, it's seen it with Detroit, it's seen it with Boston reinvented. New York is the only metro that has really proven that it can scale up to 22 million people. And that means, I asked Jane Jacobs when we became friends, when she was still alive, I said, are you worried, gentrification? And my colleague Derek Thompson just wrote at The Atlantic, Derek is smart, he should know better. Oh, New York's being deadened, all the retail places are closing, and he lives on the Upper East Side. Well, of course, never mind. And the creative people aren't there. And what Jane said to me is, New York's a big place. This has happened before. There'll always be another neighborhood. There'll always be a place, and whether it's Jersey City or Newark or whatever, it's big enough to accommodate growth. And you said something we'll build stuff. I look around the entire metro and there's stuff going up. So I guess the question I want to ask you is twofold. To what degree is this scaling about building housing? To what degree is this scaling about building transit? They might all go together. And to what degree is this scaling about building economic development? I know it's a big question, but when you think about Jersey City's role in the metro, how do the housing, the transit, and the economic development fit together?
So the transit, we're a unique city in the country of a city our size where we have no control over any of our transit systems. We don't control the buses, the ferries, the Port Authority controls the path. It's a major disadvantage for the city. And so we tried to do is grow smartly with the hope that the political pressure will push the state entities or the Port Authority entities to react. I mean, they tend to be less proactive entities and more reactive entities. So we recognize that and we try to be strategic around that. I think all of those things factor in. The economic growth is important, so people have to want to stay in your city as a sense of place. We've tried to do that with creating, restaurant rows and pedestrian plazas and a sense of place. I think that the housing is important because you need a critical mass to support those. So we are growing. We have more than 18,000 units under construction right now, and I think that we can handle that. And then the hope on the transit front is that we can bend those entities to ultimately react to where we are. They are, but they're doing it very slowly. That's really where we are. We're trying on all fronts. We think they're all important.
So I'll ask you another question as a New Jerseyan. We have a new governor.
Yeah.
And the new governor and the new director of economic development, they've released a new economic development plan. And one of the things that strikes me, and I know you probably thought about this more than just about anyone, is New Jersey is advantaged and suffers from the fact that both its ends, the northern part and the southern part, have these big superstar cities. Yep. On the one end, there's the biggest and most powerful city on the world, right over there in New York. On the other hand, there's Philadelphia, half of Rutgers. My classmates were South Jerseyans and Philadelphians. And what New Jersey seems to have is a series of cities, of which perhaps Jersey City is the model, but Jersey City, Trenton, Camden, we can name a few others, that are smaller in scale. They're cities. They were quite vibrant. Some of them have revitalized, others haven't. How would you envision, given what you've seen in Jersey City and its relationship to New York, a statewide approach to creating either independent hubs of economic activity or resident or linked hubs to these major? How would you view this as a state strategy for making the state an even more vibrant and economically inclusive place?
Yeah, I think that the state, well, let me say something that Governor Murphy in the new economic development plan, which I think is going to be really helpful, is that they're focusing on startups. They're willing to take some strategic bets on smaller companies. Governor Christie really focused on the larger companies, the big narrative of moving 5,000 jobs from New York to over here. And, it's kind of like a shell game at the end of the day. And it's a good press story ultimately, but you're not really creating growth in the employment, really long-term from a regional standpoint. And ultimately, people necessarily aren't moving to Jersey City just based on JP Morgan moving across the river. So his focus more on the economic development of smaller startups, I think you can do that in all of those cities that you mentioned, and you could actually, hopefully, start to see some larger companies long term.
This is fascinating. The last thing we did together for our urban lab is we worked with a fellow named Ian Hathaway. He's a genius of startup data. This report is now even getting more and more play. We released it several weeks ago, but now we saw it yesterday reported in England in the Financial Times. What he did with our help is document the leading startup ecosystems in the world. What's so striking in that report is that San Francisco, the Bay Area, not Silicon Valley, San Francisco proper where you were, is number one. But it used to have like 80% of the startups. Now it's down to about a quarter. Guess what place is number two? The New York metropolitan area, then London, Beijing, and Shanghai. And you look at that list and it's not suburbias. It is urban centers. And so it's really interesting how this report and that piece of research fit together. That the spillover from startup, which was really a kind of lower Manhattan, Midtown South thing, the spillover of that into Jersey City, into Brooklyn, I think you're absolutely right. And partly driven by the high cost not only of residence, but the high cost of office. So maybe we should expand on that with all you've been able to do. How do you see that working? Both in Jersey City and maybe in other parts of the state, as these communities can become more startup accelerators and incubators?
Well, our SciTech City project will obviously have a role in that, and then I think what we're trying to work with some of the, I mentioned this earlier, some of the companies on the waterfront is repurposing their older, staler type businesses or lobbies and corporate environment into more dynamic spaces that are more attractive to younger professionals. And you see that on 3 or 4 of the buildings directly on Exchange Place that have gone massive renovations, trying to make it more appealing ultimately to attract some of those younger corporations and younger entrepreneurs here. Slow process, but I think we'll...
So one of the things we're seeing as we study these ecosystems is in the past, it was hardware. And then it went from computer hardware and semiconductors to software, Microsoft and the like. And Apple got into making phones and iPads. Also the software behind that. And then it got into smaller scale devices, and then it got into biotech, and then it got into social media, the internet. But now, one of the things we're documenting, people call it a smart city. We call it something else. We call it the rise of urban tech. That this field of urban tech, if you take real estate tech and property tech, construction technology, mobility, Lyft, Uber, co-living and co-working, WeWork, Airbnb, it's probably the biggest single sector of high tech ever, with the highest valuations. And what it seems that this area is really good at is that. It's good in other things, but it's really good at, and in a way, the city, the community itself, the city, if I want to say that, becomes the platform of this. It becomes a platform for generating these ideas and the platform for incubating them. How have you thought at all about this kind of smart city thing? Have you thought at all about how Jersey City could position itself as a place where some of these technologies start to come together and create a new kind of technology-enabled city?
Yeah, so one of the best things about Jersey City is its size. So at 300,000 people, you're big enough to be relevant and be a really good laboratory, and you're also small enough to be nimble and see if something works and adapt really quickly. So, you know, we're working, to give you a couple examples in the near term, you know, some stuff that have worked and some stuff that haven't worked. We've used technologies like Uber or Lyft style mapping on our EMS systems that'll map when there's an individual who's a trained healthcare professional closer than an ambulance and bridge the gap of time when a 911 call comes in. We have now, via that, the fastest EMS times in the entire country in response times. We're the first ones to do it. It's leveraging Israeli technology. We're working right now, we're in the final phase of an agreement with Aero Farms to build some small micro greenhouses in 10 to 15 locations throughout the city of housing, you know, subsidized housing sites and senior citizen locations to see if that free access to really healthy food changes the paradigm of somebody eating and how they eat, and we budgeted money for that, and we'll have that agreement soon. We're working with a company in South Jersey that we're in the initial phase of, but I think this will end up coming to realization, is called TerraCycle. It's a technology company focused on single-use cans and bags and changing how people purchase, whether it's ice cream or orange juice. And they'll have an announcement at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and hopefully I believe Jersey City will ultimately end up being kind of layered into that. We're in talks on that, leveraging technology on that front. I say that because there's a lot of ways to think about how cities can be innovative using technology, and I think Jersey City's at a place that, you know, we have the ability to be nimble and really incorporate some of that stuff. On transportation, you know, I haven't really thought or figured out yet how to get to that next phase of beyond, you know, ride sharing or Uber pool, so to speak. I'm thinking about how to repurpose, you know, our bus transit and some of the things that we rely now on the state for, on how to have a better model for that. I mean, we still struggle.
And hopefully it'll at least save us some on parking, right? We'll get some of the cars off the street and free up that space.
For sure.
In your work, you know, with the World Economic Forum or with other, are there any other communities that you look to benchmark, that are not are doing everything right, but are there any ones, you know, when you look at a community, maybe the same size or scale of Jersey City, maybe a little smaller or larger, any ones that you think are doing things in an interesting way, either here or in other countries?
Yeah, let me say, like, you know, from a United States standpoint, I would say Oakland, in the sense that it is a similar size to us. It is close proximity to San Francisco, obviously, so similar to our proximity to New York. It's a diverse city, has very similar challenges to us. So you could look at them on what they've done successfully and what they haven't done successfully. And when you look at kind of comps, you know, it's a good place for Jersey City to think about.
How are you preparing for the future? You know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd say you're now in big takeoff mode. You know, using my eyes, and I'm pretty good. I'm pretty better with intuition than anything else. That it looks like you've established the base and the future's going to come at you hard. That looking at the statistics Stephen and the lab put together, you're going to get more tech jobs, you're going to get more tech people, you're going to get more people who are saying the heck with Manhattan, it's overpriced, the heck with Brooklyn, Jersey City's the place to be. How are you preparing for the next phase of more companies and perhaps even more affluent residents looking at Jersey City as their target destination?
So I think smart growth away from the waterfront, which we're doing and we're moving towards, and then the second part is that I'm actively thinking about when the real estate market turns, which we're not far from it now, and you know, we have 5 or 6 major projects going on in the city right now that are city driven, that are, I think most cities would be happy to have one of them. We have 5 or 6 in different parts of the city that I think will act as accelerators for those areas despite a downturn in the economic environment. So, and the reason I say that is because they're strategically placed in areas that have been artificially depressed. The good example is what we're building, let's say, on Martin Luther King Drive, the municipal complex. I mean, we're driving, you know, we're really taking hundreds of jobs that were situated on the waterfront, moving into that area of the city. We're ultimately going to be driving anybody who wants to do business with the city into that area of the city. The real estate in that area is artificially depressed because of socioeconomic issues, we're ultimately going to be driving a massive hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into that area, regardless of what happens in the macro environment from a real estate standpoint. So we're trying to think about, we're in that early takeoff phase. What happens when the New York market collapses? Do I still have projects in place to get me through a downturn, which I think I do.
Going back to the 15-hour minimum wage, that the creative workers, more in Jersey City, but nationally make up about a third of our workforce. The blue collars down to 20%, people like my dad who work in a factory down to 5%. Almost half of the workforce in our country work in low-wage service jobs. They take care of our kids, they take care of our aging parents, they work in retail shops, bag our groceries, wait on us and prepare our food. How can we, my dad always told the story. He had a crappy job in a factory, went off to World War II, and as if by magic, when he came back, it was a great job. How can we start to think about that 50% of the workforce and get them to be more involved in this newer knowledge-based economy?
It's a bigger challenge than just the $15 minimum wage, putting that upward pressure. I think that, some of those challenges are going to be long past my term as mayor with regards to job skills and training and how we're thinking about where people are going. I mean, one of the things I think about as an example on this is that, when you think about kind of the focus, governments are very slow to adapt, obviously, and there's always this focus on, at this point, STEM education, right? You hear people talk about that. And then sometimes I think of myself about that, you've moved past these focus on humanities and you move towards STEM education, but at the same time as you're moving simultaneously towards artificial intelligence, I think that, you're always going to be able to have computers do better data programming and better math than humans are. So you start to think that, does that pendulum swing back towards humanities and thinking about critical thinking and what are we doing to kind of think about how we're developing minds longer term beyond that? So I don't know. So we think a lot about kind of the job skills and the training and how we're looking with the schools, but it's a longer term problem than my 4 years or 8 years.
One last question or comment for me, and then please, you have time for a few questions for the mayor. I get up this morning and I turn on my TV. And I've turned on Morning Joe and the Today Show and this and that, Fox. And I'm depressed again. And then I come here and I'm awake. I walk around the streets, I see the diversity, I see what's happening, I see this mixture. And, I came up with this line the other day. It's the worst of times in national America, the best of times in local America. How do we make that real? It is the most amazing thing that in the context of arguably one of the most dysfunctional, federal governments in our history, we have one of the most dynamic economies. That's because I think Washington's irrelevant. I think it's a big thing that's completely irrelevant. How do we get the focus with you and other mayors on this story that we really are a collection of localities, that are sort of knitted together? Or is that just pie in the, is it something that we could do in this country? Or is it just pie in the sky thinking?
I mean, I sympathize with you. It's first of all, it's depressing what's happening nationally in that conversation, but you're also on politically or governmentally on the federal level, it feels very executive driven over the last 8, 12, 20 years.
Absolutely.
And Congress, by and large, they're talking heads and they're on Morning Joe, but they're very irrelevant ultimately to the broader conversation. You look at the Kavanaugh conversation, ultimately everybody knew where everybody was voting weeks before. Nothing changed. It was just a big show that we were going through, right, because of each of their bases. Local government, has to drive ultimately results, right? So, we don't have that luxury, and it's a place that's still functional. Where I think the gap is on local government, and I'm happy that you guys focus on this a little, is that there's always the focus, like if you think about Bloomberg and the C40, there's always this focus on the larger cities. Barcelona and LA and New York, and places like Jersey City has needs as well and goals as well, without having the same resources that those other cities have. If you think about challenges around clean air, New York City has 15 people focused on clean air. We could barely afford one, right?
Yep.
So those are the things that we think about from a city standpoint, and I'm happy you guys focus on it, on that narrative, and it's city by city pushing it.
And I do think we need a C40, maybe it's a C400, like Organization for Economic Development and Inclusion. I think that's the next step. I think what localities have done on the climate issue is unbelievable, but in a way, this is maybe almost as big as an issue. So I think getting mayors and the focus on cities there is a big one. Comments, questions? Stephen, do we want people to go to a mic or just? Okay.
Morning. Yeah, so New Jersey state law gives very little flexibility around taxes for local municipalities. It's very much driven only by trade. So there's very little that we can do from a corporate tax standpoint or a real estate tax overall. Jersey City is probably more aggressive than any city in the state with regards to use of redevelopment bonds or tax abatements in order to attract, whether it's the hotel industry, whether it's the commercial industry, or whether it's residential. I think that we still have a price point advantage, and we have some protection in that for companies that are looking relative to New York City. And I think that the talent on this side of the river is as attractive as anywhere. So I think there's a lot of reasons why somebody would want to be here outside of just saying, here's the tax rate. I don't think the tax rate ultimately drives, the health of a city long-term in the decision-making process. I think that a lot of the corporations that have flexibility think about where's the talent, how can I attract it, and where can I be long-term to grow with a city. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, it's a 1% difference and that's more attractive or less attractive.
I have one other thing for you, and it's beyond your scope, but I know you'll have a thought. I talk to companies, when you just mentioned talent, all over this country and all over the world. And to a person, they are going back to the city. The talent's in the city, all the talent's in the city. I remember when I started writing about this and they thought I was crazy. We have to go back to the city. We have to go to a place like Jersey City. We need a mixed use, this and that. More people in this state live and work in the suburbs, and I know this isn't your thing, but what do? I mean, do we just let them fall apart? Or is there a way? I think there is a way to actually make a system that works, but I wonder what you think.
Well, my focus is the city, so I haven't really thought at length about kind of, in this current role about where we are with regards to the suburbs, but I think that, New Jersey's biggest gap in health of the suburbs relative to the city is because of the access to mass transit and the increase in traffic on our roads. And until you start to solve or invest in that simple kind of solution to that, or that simple problem, and find the solution to that, you're going to continue to have a problem with the suburbs. I mean, I don't know why somebody would make the decision to stay in their car for an hour and a half a day each way and to get to work and come back to live in the suburbs where you could spend more time with your kids and live in a more vibrant area in the city. That trade-off to me doesn't make any sense until you actually minimize the travel time and make it more appealing to live in the suburbs. I don't think you're going to have people making that decision.
And that's what the science says. You mentioned transit and transport, and the great advantage of the metropolitan area in New Jersey is transit and transport. But the great problem is that it's falling apart.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that down the road, what is your thoughts on what the state, the tri-state area has to do to bring this thing up to speed?
Well, I mean, I'm biased, but I think that where you see a shortcoming is around the path system and linking us seamlessly into the New York system. I think that that's like a key thing for New Jersey. I think that you could have access on the ferry system more robust from Bayonne, and even there's access points on the west side similar to a fast ferry if you wanted to think about it. I think a single seat ride on the path to New York Airport is important. So I think that when you think about the economy in this region, Newark, Jersey City, some of the urban areas, it's going to be really driven off of the path and the investments there. I think the Port Authority in many ways operates as the 51st state and with very little accountability to anybody, which is a problem. And I think they've had mission creep away from their core mission focused on transportation for the most part, into thinking about, they have a police department today that's larger than the Jersey City Police Department. They have 1,400 police officers. We have close to 1,000. Put that in perspective on where your costs are going in that Port Authority world and where their priorities are. So I think that, if you're going to invest in things like transportation, I think you need to really look at Port Authority, where their focus is, the path here, that sort of stuff.
The funny thing is, when I think about the suburbs, I think they could learn a lot from you. I think they could learn a lot from studying Jersey City, or not all of them, but a Jersey City or an Oakland. How were they remade? How did they do mixed use? How did they repurpose their housing? So I think the lesson for the suburbs is in what you've done. One last question, and what are the 1, 2, or 3 big things you'd like to do moving forward?
So, some of those projects that I mentioned, we have a 4,000 to 6,000 unit project called Bayfront on the West Side. It's a most aggressive thing that we're doing in Jersey City, probably in the tri-state region. It's about 100 acres, and it's really kind of creating a community that doesn't exist today. We have the SciTech City project, which is 17 acres, creating a science and tech incubator ecosystem. I see Paul Hoffman, our president from the Liberty Science Center, is there. That's really important to us. And then I think that the continued rebirth of Journal Square is tremendously important. That is the busiest transit hub in the state of New Jersey, and it's underperforming today. And I think that that's going to be corrected fairly quickly.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hey, thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,